standards and the sort. And it happens, right? Web app break-ins happen, web app incidents happen. And if you're unprepared, the IR can be pretty horrid.
Kind of like the presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. We're on that side.
Okay, good.
We'll just go with one side.
Yeah, we'll just go with one side.
Okay. Everyone there?
Have a seat.
Eyes left.
There we go.
All right. Second? No. All right, should I just kick it off?
Yeah.
All right. So what are the goals of incident response? The goals of incident response are essentially to answer questions, right? They can be tough questions. And make sure the incident doesn't happen again. Close the hole, fix the problem. The most difficult question to answer, of course, is what happened. And everyone always wants to know what data was touched, what was affected. Did they get to the PII? Did they root the box? And frankly, that's an open-ended question. It's always the first thing everyone wants to know. And it's a really, really difficult question to answer. You know, the question of did they touch sensitive data, sometimes sensitive data isn't even well defined. And obviously it needs to be, but everyone has different thoughts on what's sensitive, what's private versus officially declared PII. Credit cards are obvious, but is an address necessarily sensitive data or a pricing field that has to be defined ahead of time. The worst question I ever got asked was just, was the system compromised? And that was just really difficult to deal with because it's a very open-ended question. And unfortunately, that was the nature of the situation. It made going back and analyzing things really, really difficult because as opposed to knowing that something happened and being able to kind of track back from things, it was just, did something happen? So.
Another thing to add to that is whenever the incident becomes high profile, you tend to get top pressure and says, find out, did we get, what got out? Is the box still compromised? And those are the two key things that you're going to look at in any normal incident response. These are the you know, who did it? Was it internal, external, targeted? You know, where are our ending actors, so to speak? And
one of the problems with web specifically is it's almost always high profile. Right? An external DMZ site, the entire world can see. So if you have a problem, aside from just like a professional hit and run where they steal data and don't deface anything, if they make a defacement or they put some malcode up on the site, the entire world sees it, and it's really hard to keep that quiet. And you know, especially in the government arena, it can become high profile very quickly. Mike?
So with normal incident response, you have, you have certain things that you're looking for, like you have really good signs. With the web app, you don't know. You know, usually they don't need to drop any kind of files on the system. There's no real modifications that need to happen to the system. They can use SQL injection or things of that nature and exfiltrate all the data out of the database without leaving any real tracks. So that's kind of the real problem that we said, okay, we got to figure out what makes this, you know, why is this so much different, and then how do you tackle that problem? Yeah. So, like I said, with traditional incident response, you've got files on the system, right? You've got your piece of malware, it's Trojan or your rootkit or whatever. You've got data that's leaking out. This rootkit or this malware is talking to whoever's in control of it, right? So you can pretty easily set up signatures or detect that in your IDS. You can, let's see.
You can blank on the slide.
Yeah, you can blank on the slide. You just, yeah. So you've got the really basic stuff, right? You got the files, you've got the data, and that's easy to detect. But when you're doing a web app, there's no files in the system, and once the incident's over, the data is gone, and there's nothing that's sitting back on the system. There's nothing left to detect with your IDS. Like, it's kind of a one hit and you're done.
Oh, me? All right. Yeah, I'm going to talk about malcode response.
All right, so the first thing that you're going to get is whenever you actually get an alert from IDS or you get an alert from some other form of detection, which is, it should be your IDS.
Network monitoring, Richard.
So, first option, the first thing you're going to do as an incident responder is look at where it was hosted, things of that nature, try to get a copy of the malcode, something that you can, the first initial shards of evidence, if you will, to start building the case, start actually building, hey, what happened here. After you get some type of binary to analyze, you're going to begin triage. And triage is, a term borrowed from the medical industry. We're going to be in triage on this because our goal is to find out as quickly as possible those questions that we asked earlier. Was data exfiltrated? Is the server still owned? Things of that nature. So typically this works out, and this is a whole other talk, by itself. So we're not going to get into too deep of this, but drop it into a VM, use some behavioral analysis to figure out, what DLLs did it drop? Did it pull down a rootkit? Is it just a Trojan dropper? Did it pull down other malicious things from another site? Is it a bot? What's its intent, and what are the intent of the actors behind it? So you start answering those questions, and then based upon those questions, you notify the sysadmins to contain the box if necessary. If you think it actually got owned, you would look at the box and say, okay, is it patched for the vulnerability that was used? These types of details. Did this specific attack work on that box? If it did, then if it's highly likely, then you need to notify the sysadmins and then block any sites it's speaking to. You can find those sites from your behavioral analysis, and also from that you can take the behavioral analysis data and find where it's sending its data to and who's controlling it, and then begin to have your IDF start looking for that data and start looking for those types of behaviors on the network, the behavior that's indicative of that malcode.
How mature is that process at the internet cafe you work at?
I just serve coffee, man.
It's a pretty mature process, right? You've been doing it for a couple of years. Everyone has the drill down.
Right.
How about web app? Are you seeing more web app incidences at your internet cafe or your bank?
So when you're doing web app response and you're a normal incident responder, a lot of times you're trying to fit like what you already know into the incident you think just occurred. So your first response is, okay, I'm going to go take that hard drive and analyze it, and then you realize that that's really stupid because there's nothing on the hard drive.
We get into that.
So yeah.
The other way. Go ahead.
So the first problem that you really run into with the web app stuff is knowing that you're owned, because like I said, there's no necessarily malware sitting on the box. There may be. Now, maybe your site's hosting an exploit and it's compromising people as they come to the site and they let you know. Or maybe your site has been defaced and it's up on Zone H. That's a pretty good indication that you've got a problem.
Or you're just blogged. Thanks. There's the disclosure process with WebAppSec in particular has just kind of like fallen to the ground in pieces. It's becoming almost trendy now to find vulnerabilities on public sites and post them to message boards and different blogs and the sort. And that's actually a pretty common way of finding out you have a problem. It's kind of like a public cooperative vulnerability assessment program, if you will. And it makes even relatively issues that are honestly relatively minor into very large political problems at work. And unfortunately, like this and having a user email you saying the website looks funny, those really are two very common ways of figuring out you had a web app problem. Now, not everyone works in like a really fancy ISP who has all sorts of network monitoring and content monitoring and the sort. Every environment's different, especially here in DC. The standard deviation is huge. But this actually seems to be a pretty common way of figuring it out. Now the approach, I'll grab this one. The approach to web app is very different, right? Because like these guys said, you don't have like a piece of malcode on the file system that you can sit there and you're not going to like run in case against the server. That doesn't really make sense. It's a different approach. Unfortunately, the major approach is log analysis. It's all about the logs. That's difficult. You have to be familiar with WebAppSec, obviously. You don't have to be a serious expert in it, but there's WebAppSec encompasses a broad range of vulnerabilities and techniques, and you have to be at least familiar with that broad range, if necessarily completely deep with it. And there's millions of logs, and sometimes you can get them, sometimes you can't. Sometimes there are no logs just due to system administration snafus. But obviously you have the web server logs, but there could also be things in the system event logs, the Windows event logs. If you could have authentication systems you have to go pull logs down from, and database logs. Especially when you're talking about SQL injection, database logs can be very handy. And you have to be prepared to get all this stuff, meaning they have to be backed up and retained. Thanks. And what do you look for in logs? Yeah, that's a clever slide. Okay, next. I regret that idea now. By the way, the file, the name of this PowerPoint file is redbull2.ppt. So you can guess what we were doing. Who got home at 4 a.m.? So you can look at the logs, and something could completely jump out at you, right? Like, for instance, you look at this, and you go, SQL injection. They used SQL injection, right? But did they really? Or does the website actually just pass complete SQL expressions in the query strings? You never know, right? You'd be surprised how many sites, quick Google, it's an easy, obvious Google, you'd be shocked how many sites actually pass SQL in the query string, right? So you have to actually have some basic understanding of the web application. Sometimes you have to have very detailed understanding. But you go through the logs, you can look for things like brute force attempts in the 404s, right? And sometimes those are going to be in big giant blocks. Like, someone ran Nikto or something, you'll have a big giant block of 404s. If it's a professional doing some manual testing and taking their time, it might be a lot more subtle. And sometimes a 404 is indicative of something else. Like if there's a request for something called something, right, that returns a 404, it's really easy to bypass that as just assuming that they were trying to generate a 404 or whatever purpose. But you dig into that a little bit, and you find that a 404 for /something comes from this toolkit called ATD something. I think actually Tyler, wasn't it Lurk who wrote that up? I think it was. It's a toolkit that does SSL exploits, and it intentionally generates one 404 over HTTP to version the server. So one simple 404 can be indicative of a completely different type of attack. And 500s can be injection testings. But then you have the issue with posts, right? All you see are posts to a page. Now, if you see the same IP or the same session ID or the same bizarre user agent doing a post over and over and over against a page, that could certainly be injection testing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. Who titled that? You titled that, right? No, I wasn't around for that part. In the real world, right? In the real world, the logs you get will be messed up. There's a lot of chaos involved in doing this in the real world. You have new sysadmins, people don't know who developed it. The Secret Service took that server, we don't have it anymore. Different issues come around. You'll see logs that don't contain the IP. You'll see logs that actually change format halfway through. You'll see clusters that log completely differently. Dub1 logs completely differently from Dub2. And even logs with big giant chunks of missing time in them. So you're going down the logs, and all of a sudden there's 3 days gone, and a lot of issues. But posts are a big issue. And when you see posts, one of the first things I want to do is figure out what that page does with the post. First of all, is the page actually supposed to take a post, or is it supposed to take a get and they switched it over to a post? What does it post? You can. Whoa! I did something wrong.
Where's the rest of it?
Help. The PowerPoint's been owned.
Is that where you fell asleep on the keyboard?
Yeah. You really want to learn what the page does to figure out what they would have been doing in all the posts, because of course a post doesn't log the query string. So you may need the source code. You want to see if it interacts with the database, a la SQL injection. How does that page constrain the input or validate the input? Is it vulnerable? And
yeah, one of the things that we've run into when we're doing this is, so the site is developed by somebody else, right? And they know what goes on and what's normal for their site. But when you're looking at it as an incident responder, you don't have a clue. So you have logs to a site that you don't know what is normal for. And so you've got to spend some time just trying to understand what what the site's doing, what it's supposed to do, so that you can you'll be able to pick out stuff that's not supposed to be there. And that takes time, and it's really helpful if you have access to developers.
The other part of that, I'm going to back up this slide. The last two of these are integrity problems, which we address, integrity of the logs, and then also if you're not logging the data at all, you have a problem. It's nothing better than to walk into an area and walk up to the SA and go, hey, let me see your logs. We need to figure out what happened. They're like, and they get this dumbfounded look like, logs? Like, yeah, logs. And like, yeah, we don't have any of those. We think we might, and it's just not logged properly. They're not backed up, and you have absolutely no idea. And clustering brings up a whole new other problem that we'll talk about.
Me? Thanks. Yep. Well, do page it down for me before I destroy the PowerPoint again. Thanks. So, question, comment?
I just want to mention, as part of logging, also, you guys are talking about correlating your server, your web server, proxy
Right.
server, web server. Time's really important, too.
Right.
Yeah.
So not just having the logs, make sure everything's at the right time. If
You're
you've got
right.
millions of hits a day, you got to make sure that
Right.
there's a lot of space between the things.
Right.
Well, I mean, fortunately, when you're doing instant response, you get... Oh, yeah, sorry. So the point was made that there's a lot of different logs you have to correlate against, right? Proxy logs, IDS logs, et cetera. And that takes a lot of time, essentially is the...
He's saying that the time needs to be synchronized.
Oh, syncing the time. Yeah. Yeah, time syncing. Yeah, time syncing. Yeah, if you're lucky if the logs are time stamped, yeah.
Have something.
Right. Have time. Is that a question or a timing mark?
Is that a... Yes, sir.
Given the proliferation of sites that are either fairly seriously dynamic in their generation or also completely dynamic, where you don't actually necessarily know what the page is going to look like because it's going to be completely customized per user, or in the case of something strange like SharePoint sites where the user could modify it on the fly. Given the preponderance of sites that are either completely dynamic or partially dynamic, things like SharePoints where you've got a bunch of different modules they can put together in any random way they like. And do you have any thoughts on doing the analysis to determine what is normal in terms of the log data coming out of them? And given that each module could potentially be logging at different levels and different types of data coming in.
Well, my first thought is, and this is just my first thought. I'm by far not the expert. That'll be something I'll pass off to him. But my first thought is you know, you should. There's been a lot of work done on the desktop as far as to see what network traffic is supposed to come out, and because that's dynamic and random in itself. There should be more work done in the area of actually figuring out what that those dynamic strings look like.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good. It's a great question, and we'll give you a hat. The more complex the application, the more difficult it's going to be, and sometimes the best you can say is, I don't know. I haven't done anything with SharePoint in particular. Everything I've looked at has been relatively simple sites, pretty basic applications, amazingly dynamic pages. You know, then you have the problem of then figuring out what user context things were done in. I would say that probably the good thing about COTS applications like SharePoint is they should be fairly instrumented, and they're, you know, like should be. he's going like, no, not at all. But fortunately, managed frameworks like that give you the capability to do a lot more instrumentation without having to necessarily write all that code yourself. And I mean, frankly, this is what it all boils down to: is if you're working in a really high assurance level environment, like, you know, an internet cafe. And your crown jewels, right? That's where you're going to have your real smart guys doing the network monitoring, and you know, you've got your best people working on it all the time, and that's when you have to have the developers go back and actually instrument things at the application level itself. And you can certainly do things then like retain post data for analysis, right? Which solves a major problem. You can log exceptions to certain rules. You can log complete sessions and have complete you know, data flow analysis available to you. But you have to go back and do that yourselves. And you know, in the Beltway, I think enough security problems have people have problems just like getting you know, some secure code out the door in the first place, getting some web VAs done. So I think, you know, in terms of practically speaking, it's going to be extremely difficult to get your development team to go back and really instrument the application the way it should be. So again, that falls down to risk management. If you work in a really high assurance level environment, you can do that. Now, on the SQL Server, let's talk about this, because SQL Server has some logs that can be really useful for going back and figuring out things like SQL injection. If the SQL injection occurs in a GET, then it's super easy to figure out what happened, right? It's in the web server logs, assuming you have web server logs. One of the problems you'll find, though, right, someone's site gets popped, they say, what happened? One of the first problems you'll have figuring out is which of all the people doing SQL injection against that site were the ones who actually went in and changed something. And I say that half in jest, but I'm absolutely serious. You get, bad websites attract people. They get posted on blogs, or they found them because of an easy Google or something, and they deface a website. There's something changes, so there is a problem. But going back and just separating all the wheat from the chaff can be really difficult. If the SQL injection is against a post, the web logs just can't help you, right? They'll tell you what page someone was pounding on. In the exception logs, you may see the evidence of testing, right? Someone puts in a single quote and breaks the query and gets that ODBC error message. So you'll have some indications of where it occurred, but you still won't be able to figure out what they were doing and what they touched, unless the changes to the database were really obvious. Now, fortunately, SQL Server has, question, comment?
Yeah, have you dealt with multiple replacements where they're kind of overlapping?
Actually, yes, to both questions. Yeah, it's horrendous, yeah. Say again? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. He asked if I've dealt with multiple defacements where the same box, the same system was owned multiple times. Yeah, and it absolutely compounds the issue. And the time issue of going back and figuring out what happened. One of the tools you can actually use there is Google, right? You can go look at the Google cache and see when things were changed in the cache. Yeah, it happens, and obviously it increases the complexity quite a bit. In the back, please. Does the complexity increase significantly when you're working in a web farm with a SQL cluster on the back end? Well, yeah, of course. I haven't done one, but yeah, that's a considerably more complex environment than access on an ASP site. So yeah, it's going to be more complex. I think what you would have going for you in that case, though, is probably some more mature systems administration, better documentation, better knowledge of the system in general, because I don't think people are going to put good money into building a cluster and the effort of building like a SQL cluster and maintaining a site to that degree without really staying on top of it. A lot of this stuff boils down to systems administration, frankly. Transaction logs in the SQL Server. The transaction logs can be helpful, but there's a problem with transaction logs, right? The transaction logs aren't meant for systems administrators. They aren't meant for incident response. They're meant for the internal functionings of SQL Server. So it can keep a log of what it's supposed to do, and if something happens, the server gets rebooted in the middle of an operation, it can go back to that log and figure out what it was supposed to do and do that operation. So they're in a funky format. There is some ASCII in it. You can do strings on it. But you actually need tools if you really want to read the whole thing and break it out into individual operations. Another really big problem with transaction logs is they're to record the changes to the database or the data structure that the SQL Server is supposed to do. So they don't log selects. As far as I'm aware, if anyone knows differently, definitely say something. But they don't log selects, which is a big part of doing SQL injections. Sometimes you want to deface the website and get some VML up on superbowl.com, or you've been hacked by a fluffy bunny. Sometimes you just want to grab the data and run. And around DC, that's the big threat. It's what's being egressed. So the transaction logs, hey man, what you doing? So the transaction logs can be really helpful with that, right? But only if you actually have them. Remember, they're not like web server logs. They're not for systems administrators, and it's not uncommon for people to not retain them because they can be large, and once they're committed to the database, you don't necessarily need them. And then you have SQL auditing, right? Trace files and the sort. But doing a trace operation is pretty intensive, and that's not something you're going to do all of the time. You do that as a debugging effort. I'll let you talk about this.
All right, so on the IDS side,
I just wanted to point out for MySQL specifically that you can enable slow query logging, which there's some threshold on how long a select or any query will take. I think default's 10 seconds. That could be really helpful if you take that down to like 3 seconds. If you have a query that takes longer than that, it gets logged. And often, I would think if you have a large database table, if someone's broke into your site, they want to grab everything from that, and that could trigger that. So.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a great point. You want a hat? Another hat? Sure. It's a blue one. Well, come up afterwards.
All right. So the IDS, it's in the kind of the last part here where what your problems are, but it doesn't have to be your problem, and that's kind of the point that we want to make. Right now, a lot of people probably don't do a really great job of using an IDS to detect SQL injection or detect other types of web application attacks, but you can. And some of the things that, I mean, obviously there are signatures for the signature-based ones, your Snort, your Dragon, other IDSs. They've got signatures to try to detect some basic SQL injection, things of that nature. But you can also use other IDSs in maybe somewhat unplanned ways to log all GET requests or all POST requests to a site. And so, granted, a lot of that should be in your web logs, but the web logs are there kind of as a evidence file. So when you get to the server, you already know something's wrong. That's the only reason you're typically looking at them. But if your IDS is logging as somebody is doing a whole string of weird queries, or somebody's generating a lot of 404s, or you see clear SQL injection attempts, you can go ahead and cause that to alert, and then you know to go look at your other logs that you're already looking at.
What about the idea of something like pool tables, where you have a table right in there that nobody should touch?
Word.
You put something like LogWatch on it or something.
Yeah. Word. That's one of our recommendations. Just putting dummy data in a table and just putting in an egress filter for the word "catch me." Totally. It's super simple. It's easy. It works, and egress filtering is great stuff. That's absolutely a great thing to do. So we'll kind of give you a hat. We'll give you half a hat because we actually have that in the slides where we talk about what to do.
One of the
front or the back.
One of the last things, though, is your IDS is kind of only as good as the people watching it, right? And the rules that you have. So if you have a large web farm that you're protecting, then spend a lot of time setting up good signatures that are going to alert for this stuff. Don't just throw something off the shelf in there and say, "Oh, I hope the signatures catch it." You've got to really tune your stuff down and spend good time setting up good signatures, and you can even tune it to your sites. Like if you know that you've only got 3 sites you really care about, then set up your signatures to watch those sites more closely.
Right.
And then SSL can be a real problem there. You can always throw the keys into your IDS if you've got them from the site so that your IDS can analyze that traffic. But if you don't, then you're just kind of screwed.
Well, and that also assumes you even know the site exists. It's a lot of times this will happen on websites you had no idea were under your realm of responsibility. Question, comment?
One of the ideas I had when I saw this and SSL issue was.
Thank you.
One of the ideas I had when I saw the and SSL issue was a product called Stunnel. Typically you set up Stunnel so you have Stunnel at one end and Stunnel at the other end, but you don't have to do that. You can just have Stunnel on your firewall or perimeter. Incoming connections are on port 443 SSL. Stuff coming out the other side is port 80. You just redirect it straight to your web server. You can do all your analysis on that instead of on the SSL, and it's all in the clear.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm really interested in the monitoring aspects of all this. So I'm going to plug Baitlick's talk. I plan on attending that because I know these are issues that you come across all the time, how to deal with stuff like SSL. And we had 2 questions, comments in the back.
I had the...
We got to use the mic, though. Do this first. So
that might be a great idea for ease of use and taking your SSL and then making it non-SSL, but in the security world, that's totally bad, and in a lot of organizations, it's not doable at all.
Well, I mean, you can always terminate SSL before the IDS, right? You can always just put an accelerator up there, and if your environment allows you to live with that clear text zone,
Well, that's just
but
what I'm saying.
whose
That's not
environment
always
allows that,
possible to-
right?
To take that and
Right.
go clear text off from your IDS back to your web server.
You know, from what I see, from what I hear, SSL is still a problem. Do you want to comment on that quickly, or save it for the talk? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know, I think SSL still presents challenges. And you know, I'm willing to bet that SSL on web traffic is the majority of encryption you have to deal with IDSs. You know, I know encryption in general is a problem for IDSs. I'm not sure how many times you really have to deal with SSH and other encrypted data, maybe encrypted egress stuff, but SSL is extremely common on the web.
Well, and one of the things you can do is you can put the keys into the IDS, so you're not passing it on. The traffic's still encrypted, but the IDS itself is able to decrypt it when it hits the IDS, analyze it, and then, and then, yeah, if your IDS supports that, some do, so you can always do that.
I call shenanigans on the notion that you can actually do that. I've never, ever seen anyone effectively implement SSL decryption on the fly in any IDS above, what, George, 10 megabits? Maybe 10 megabits?
So I could do this on like my Comcast, but not my FiOS.
These are tough problems. The SSL and you know, detecting SQL injection attacks with IDS. It's next to impossible. The thing you can also do, though, I wanted to comment on is you can look for peripheral effects of the attack. One of the things you mentioned, the ATD OpenSSL exploiter, the thing that was doing the get something. I wrote
Right.
that. Not the exploiter. I wrote the write-up that you were talking about. One of the interesting things about that was that it was actually all the tools they uploaded after the attack are infected with the RST.B Linux virus, which is an ELF infector. So what happens is all these script kiddies get these tools on these systems, and they copy them from system to system, and over the course of their lifespan, they get infected with this RST.B. Now it has a vector you can detect if this RST infected file is in transit on your network to or from your web server. That's probably a pretty good sign that you've already been owned by something.
Yeah, that's
also, if you can see the traffic that the RST virus sends out, it sends it to an IP address that's no longer listening. But if you see, you know, traffic to that IP address from your web server, it's also another good sign.
You're right. You get the signs from that specific sort of situation because
Free hat?
that brings you into the kind of malcode. We spent 2 slides talking about the whole malcode thing, making noise and stuff like that off the desktop. So I'll give you that dude's other half. How's that? Or we'll work it out. Yeah, we'll give you a hat. Where were we? Hold on. I want to talk a little bit more about the IDS thing, right? I do a lot of talking on WebAppSec, right? And I've alwaed said that network monitoring for this sort of thing is very difficult because of issues like SSL and it's not exactly signature-based stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if you picked your crown jewel system, and this is the one website that will end the world if it gets compromised, then you can, if your organization is willing to devote the resources to this, you can go through and really build very highly instrumented rule sets. You can build rule sets that say, this get or misfire. You can go through and say that this specific page, if you get input that isn't a 1, 2, 3, set an alert. You shouldn't see a post to this specific page. You should only see gets. But that's only if you're willing to put that effort into it. Frankly, I don't think many environments are. Okay, so dude, you had to misfire, but speak your mind. Question, comments? Yep, you. Sir.
You're talking about, security at the web application, but how about pushing stuff to a more centralized location, like in the server and doing, detection and something like mod security in Apache?
Well, yeah, that's an absolutely great idea. I mean, that can be a relatively, I don't want to say it's a large system change, but it's, it's definitely affecting the server build. But if you're running Apache, you should definitely be running mod security. It's effective. I'm not going to say it's the only thing you should ever do, but it's a great tool. You should absolutely run URL scan and the IIS lockdown tools. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any use for business practices and enumerating correct URL? Going to the track from the internet traffic of internet traffic and logging what you did not know or what you did not deliver?
Using a reverse proxy.
Reverse proxy that can log everything all together and then looking for this stuff to find new stuff that happened?
Yeah. Using a reverse proxy as a packet capture, just a giant packet dump.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. If you can do that in your organization, absolutely. Anything you can do to retain, and in fact, I've been wondering if there's a distribution or a product or something out there that is nothing but a rolling buffer of packet captures. So something happens, you say freeze, and you have like the last 2 days or the last terabyte of packet caps, so you can go through and analyze that. Yeah, if you can implement that in your architecture, that's a phenomenal idea. I think around here, it might be a little bit hard to affect architecture changes like that if you work in the security department. That involves working with the network groups and other departments. But that's obviously a great idea, a great thing to do. All right. Another big help when you're doing an IR in a web app is, believe it or not, just a vuln assessment, right? You can sit there and go through all the logs, and try and figure out what they did, or you can do grab the latest vuln assessment and see what was immediately available. If you have this big glaring SQL injection on the front page, then maybe that's what they used. The problem is you patched your web server. The problem is obviously you have to do a web app vuln assessment, not like scanning for IAVAs and patches. That doesn't necessarily help so much. A good VA can tell you where the most probable vulnerabilities are. Right? Vuln assessments aren't perfect, but they can at least identify the low-hanging fruit, the glaring stuff that people will see very quickly. They can also help you identify the normal operation of the site. They can help you identify a little bit of the data flow and show you relatively normal packets from the time the VA was done, which can be really useful when you're trying to figure out how the site operates, how it works. You can see things like if a page normally takes a GET versus a POST, what the input format for a page normally looks like, a little bit of the data flow, etc. Site diagrams are invaluable. Again, a lot of times you'll be working on sites you haven't seen, you haven't worked on. Site diagrams can help you understand everything about the website. They can give you POCs, which can actually be hard to get. It can be very difficult to track down like the dev POC, the DBA. It can be difficult just to track down who the system administrator for that system is. And again, this all depends on your organization. But the big thing they can also provide is show you critical areas of the system, right? Show you where the money is, and give you some ways of kind of following the trail from that. But again, only if you have them. So what do you guys want to know?
So you're going to get on one way or the other if you have crappy web apps or just web apps in general that haven't been vetted and actually tested for these types of vulnerabilities. First thing to do is back up and train and retain the transaction logs and any logging for that matter. Be sure that they have suitable retention time, things of that nature, but also that they're in a secure location, that they can't be changed. You can ensure integrity, things of that nature, and because that's really your first leads on actually trying to figure out what happened. Ensure the server's log constantly, such as inside a cluster you might have web server 1 logging something different than web server 2. When you go to test what the actual SQL injection or whatever that you saw, your IDS saw, you don't get anything, you get a 404, but the attacker actually got stuff back because they were going against 2 different servers. In the load balancing, you got hit 2 different ones, so you've got different things that are dealing with there, which goes back to the complications of having clusters and clusters of web servers. And also, don't post them on the internet, and I think you might want to talk more about the logs.
Oh, we don't have any screenshots, do we? I don't remember if they're in there or not. Yeah, anyhow, I mean, so we're Googling around for web logs to look at, and it just turns out that everybody loves to host out their log files. Log consistency is really important. And again, if you work in average size corporation or department of the anything, when you get an IR, you're going to go back and it's going to be a system you may not have even known you had or you haven't worked on. Consistent logging and comprehensive logging is really, really key. But when your organization has like 500 web applications, you can't assure that it's always going to be that way. And you know, when you get logs where like due to some massive configuration tragedy, the client IP is actually the proxy, that so impedes your ability to do any useful response. It's a really obvious thing. You want to make sure they're logging everything they can. At a minimum, you want to make sure they're logging IPs, the server host name, right? Because you'll probably figure out that the server was on a virtual, right? Ever break into a database and go, wow, there's lots of other sites data on this thing. It happens. Make sure they log query strings, right? Otherwise, you just get page names, and that's a big thing. And monitor your content for changes, right? I mean, people have been doing that for like 10 years. I think it was, it must have been like 8 or 9 years ago at Digex. We would just use SiteScope, and it would just, you know, make a get for a page and hash it or something and comparing it. But monitor your content so that you can figure out when you got defaced versus Brian Krebs, yeah? Having it showing up on the post somewhere, or having your help desk say, we're getting calls from customers about a picture on our website that they don't like. And building signatures on dummy database entries, the honey drops, right? It's super simple to do. It's really easy. It's very effective, and that can help you answer the hardest question of all, which is what data was accessed. If you want to be the most prepared you can, get a runtime book, right? Have some documentation. Know where your PII is, right? It's hard to say if an attacker touched the PII, the sensitive data, if your customer can't tell you what the sensitive data is. You know, did they get the secret stuff? I don't know. Why don't you tell me what the secret stuff is, and maybe I can tell you if they got to it or not. You have to have that stuff documented ahead of time. Up-to-date VAs is important, of course. You know, processes to deal with other groups. Just having POCs in the other departments that you work with on a regular basis and have a relationship with can help.
So here's some of our like wish list stuff. Like this is stuff that will help make everybody's life easier when you're doing one of these things. You know, we've talked about some things. Some of the things that we've talked about don't really work that well, and so we'd like to see those things greatly improved over the next couple of years. Definitely the ability to selectively log post data. So obviously you don't want to log post data on like a login screen, but maybe you do on other screens that accept post data. You know, if you've got to use it, then at least be able to log it so that you can go back and see what happened. And right now, it's not really built out of the box. You know, nothing really does that right now, and that's a problem. So you may also want to look for specific types of SQL queries that are going by, whether that's in your IDS or other places. But you know, make sure those things are built in before you host this out to the whole world. Don't let anybody do anything they want to your database. That's really, really bad. Right now, there are some tools out there that do log file analysis, but none of them that do anything to help you really along. Like if you know what you're looking for, then you can find the bad stuff. But if you don't have a clue, there's nothing out there that does any sort of real analysis for you. It more just serves the data up to you in whatever way that you want. And so that's a real problem, because most people that are going to be doing these things are regular IR people, and they don't know what to look for necessarily in a web app. They also don't know what's normal or bad for your specific app. So maybe building out some tools that can do some basic analysis to find strings of things that look bad. You know, even if it's just, I mean, we went through and made a list of like things that you would put in like a grep statement that, you know, fire off at a log file. But having maybe tools that are built that do some of that for you. Joel?
So using the sensitive data, like Fish said, you've got to know where your sensitive data lies, and if you don't know that, you've got bigger problems than anything else. But if you see that, log it. You know, PCI and SOX already requires this. I think you were saying that there were individual agencies that were actually required to log access to every bit of PII and things of that nature, and whether it's authorized or not, and actually keep those for compliance. Use a SIM. Back to what you said about the time, keeping the time correct. SIMs can help this out. That's security information managers, stuff like ArcSight, things of that nature. They can pull all these logs together and actually help you start actually drilling down on some of the stuff. And one of the other easier things to do is you can hash your pages every so often to see if they've been modified, changed, or if things like that have been kind of tampered with.
So we don't have
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, we don't have the screenshots, but I'd like to thank the People's Republic of China for the 2 gigs of log files they're hosting on their website. And to the dude in Australia who's been doing the SQL injection, the single quotes are killing you. And I think we're at our time limit now. But if you have questions, you want to talk more, you know, obviously we're going to be here the whole weekend. So thank you very much. And those of you with the great questions, come up for the hats. Broken one. Come up for the hats, and the dude in the back gets 2.